Perfect. All right. Welcome, everybody, to our January virtual tasting for the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club, our first tasting of 2023. Very, very excited to have Dr. Ethan Etnyre of Etnyre Wines, now located in the fabulous SLO Coast, San Luis Obispo Coast AVA, that was just officially granted AVA status last year. So the wines we are drinking, while they are technically SLO Coast, because they're an older vintage, they're all San Luis Obispo County vintage. But we are excited to have him. And before we start, RIP Lisa Marie Presley, who passed away this evening. 54. Yes. Sorry. She
wow.
Yeah, exactly. So RIP Lisa Marie.
Just at the Golden Globes on Monday.
She was, yeah, full cardiac arrest apparently, and was unable to recover. So not to bring this down, we'll bring it back up. Of course, as you all know, we'll have you muted for our chat with Dr. Etnyre. And if you want to ask him any questions or tell us what you're eating, what you're pairing with the wines, whatever it might be, throw those into the chat and we will ask him over the course of our discussion. And we will give you some time at the end to unmute yourself and ask him any questions if he can stick around for that at that point. But before we jump in, Dr. Etnyre, we always start by asking you the most important question, which is, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you have ever opened and tasted?
I'm going to hedge and go with two, but first off,
okay.
I'm off duty. I am not a doctor at this moment. So
okay.
Please.
All right. But it sounds so much more fun and official when I say Dr. Etnyre.
Oh, but that's all day long. This is good. I'm relaxed now.
If I was a doctor, I would have everybody refer to me as Dr. Kern, like constantly. In fact, for the short period of time when I passed myself off as a cardiologist at Casa Escobar in West LA, I was always referred to as Dr. Kern. Probably still am to this day.
But what kind of doctor are you?
Yeah, sorry. Cardiologist at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. Yeah.
Sooner or later, I have to hear that story.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
And Ethan, what kind of doctor are you?
Family medicine doctor.
Yes. And you are at Cal Poly right now. You are one of the staff physicians at Cal Poly, if I'm not mistaken.
I am. It's a really cool gig. Being able to treat the young folks. Very, very great place to work. So I'm feeling very fortunate and blessed about that one. That's pretty cool.
All right, but we will not refer to you as doctor. You are just Ethan Etnyre, winemaker.
And I like that a lot.
For this
one. But I do have a question on that note. Were you already working as a doctor in the area, or is it just a great coincidence that you're in a wine region and working?
So I graduated from medical school, and my wife is from Southern California. She was smart enough to convince me to come to California, but we didn't go to Southern California. We liked the Central Coast. Even on our interviews up here, it became apparent that people grow grapes around here. I thought that was pretty cool. I grew up in the Chicago area. Chicago, when you grow up in Chicago, you drink Cabernet, you drink Chardonnay. That's pretty much what you drink if you're going to drink
Cabernet. I think you mean over there. You drink a lot of Cabernet, some Merlot, maybe rooting on the bears.
Dog bears. And so I came out here. I was a little disappointed that there wasn't a lot of Cab, and there was Chardonnay. I don't love white wines as much as I love red wines. So when we interviewed, we kind of looked around. We saw that there were grapes growing. Thought that was pretty cool. Decided to take jobs out here. And so right when we got our place to live, we rented a place in Pismo. I made some quick phone calls, and within 18 days of arrival, we had 150 pounds of Cabernet fermenting in the garage.
Wow. Within 18 days?
Yeah, because we arrived in August, that 31st of August. And so I was able to secure some grapes just after moving in, read as many books as I could get my hands on, and washed my wife's feet and tossed her into the bin. And it was such a great experience, and totally got me hooked. year after year after that, I was sourcing grapes from people and doing the home winemaker thing, all the way through the start of us becoming commercial in 2005. So, so I've been making wine on my own since '92, and then commercial since 2005. So had a long run at it, but totally fun, totally into it, kind of right from when we set foot in California. It was really cool.
Nice. And go ahead. Yes, let's talk memorable, and then I will follow up with my next question.
Well, I was just kind of segueing back to, you asked what my favorite bottles of wine or bottle of wine was, and I'm going to go with a bottle of Pinot and a bottle of white.
Okay.
So there currently is not a local wine shop in Arroyo Grande where I live, and my friend ran the wine shop, and there was a bottle of Dalinger Reserve Pinot Noir open. It was a I believe a 94. So this was back in 97. And this was at a time when I was kind of learning about wine that wasn't Cabernet and wasn't Chardonnay. And I thought that wine was just mind-blowing, how beautiful, how pretty it was. It didn't need to be big like a Cabernet. I was really impressed. That stood out as the Pinot Noir for me for years and years, and a completely memorable wine. I remember who I had the wine with. It was a treat. The white wine, I was with one of the same individuals who decided to hold a men's potluck. And this was mid-90s, maybe 96. And so the deal was everybody brings a dish and everybody brings a bottle of wine. And this was back in the day where my friend was running the wine shop. So he knew some people in the wine industry. Amongst them was John Alban, who showed up with a bottle of Chateau Beaucastel via Vineyard, 100% Roussanne.
Oh, wow.
From the mid 80s. So a lot of the individuals there were looking at the wine and looking at a little bit of color on the wine and thinking about how this wine was more than 10 years old, a white wine out of Chateau Beaucastel, and maybe poo-pooing it a bit out of the gate before tasting. It was mind-blowing how supple and full of flavor and nuanced with layers upon layers that wine was. I don't drink a lot of white wine. I sound like that ad, but when I do, I prefer. It was an amazing wine. Almost good enough to try and get me to plant Roussanne, but I didn't plant any Roussanne. So we planted 100% to, well, 100%. We planted to Pinot Noir and to Syrah here at our vineyard, and with one tiny little row of Torrontes, which has its own story behind it.
Absolutely. And your stomach lining and your heart thanks you for not planting Roussanne, given how difficult it is. Of course, you're growing Pinot, so you've traded one stress for another there. So many follow-up questions based on what you've just told us, but I want to sort of circle back to your true garagiste days. And what was it that transitioned you from just making Cabernet to ultimately planting your own vineyard of both Pinot and Syrah? Were those grapes that you were then making wine in your garage out of? But what led to that transition, since you were such a Cabernet lover, to base your commercial label around these two individual varieties?
Well, one of the things I found was that initial Cabernet didn't taste amazing. It was Cabernet from the Central Coast, and I'm not going to name the vineyard nor the producer, but I later, because I was not wild about what I made. I thought, man, this is not wonderful, but it's my first wine, so it's what I've got. I later went out to the winery where that fruit was from and found that my wine was similar to the wine they were pouring. And so I thought, all right, so perhaps I don't like Cabernet from Central Coast. And over the next several years, from 92 to 95, 96, trying more and more wines from the Central Coast led me to what grows really well here, what I really like from this area being Pinot and Syrah. And so cool climate Syrah is a total treat for me. I love the wines from a cool climate like the Central Coast. And Pinot Noir is hard to beat from the Central Coast. So those were the wines that the grapes that I selected to plant, just because of what I came to know of the wines that I love from this area.
When you were getting Cabernet, was it from kind of the SLO Coast area, or were you getting it up from Paso where it's a little warmer?
It was SLO Coast area. Yeah.
Okay. So cool climate Cabernet is not the greatest thing.
I learned that lesson. It is true. It was fun to stomp on. It was fun to go through the process. It was a great learning experience. That was the last time I made Cabernet. The first time and the last time.
1992.
1992.
Yes.
Somewhere there's still a bottle around. I'm not really looking forward to opening it.
Hopefully it hasn't turned you off Cabernet entirely. Hopefully you are leaving it up to, you're obviously professional now, but leaving it up to the areas that are known for Cabernet.
Absolutely. And that's a great spot to, I mean, as I'm sure many of the people that purchase wines through you have a pretty clear understanding. Some grapes do really well in some regions and some don't do so well. And trying to look for, understanding regions and understanding what grapes you like and what grapes you want to seek out, and trying to push to go to the regions where you like those wines. And not the Central Coast for Cabernet necessarily.
Right. So for those that are drinking along with us tonight, we're going to start with the Pinots, but we're going to drink earliest to oldest, younger to older. So we're going to start with the 2018 Pinot Noir. So you made your first year of cab, and then did you immediately switch over to Pinot for your own garage making, or did you experiment with some other grapes in the area? Because obviously you're right close to the Etna Valley. Chardonnay grows there, and I know you have predilection for Chardonnay.
So I have purchased some Chardonnay fruit through the years, and I like what I can get out of the Chardonnay. I think, back in the days of home winemaking, certainly I didn't have much technology. I don't have a way of cool fermenting anything. So making Chardonnay, I didn't think was going to continue to make a lot of sense for me, at least certainly here at my place. The very next year, I had come to know the winemaker for Tally, and he said he would sell me some grapes. So the story he loves to tell about me is how I went out to Tally and he helped bucket out some grapes from one of their bins into my bucket bin food grade trash can.
Right.
And then I schlepped that home and made 100 pounds worth of Pinot Noir. That was nice fruit. That was grown in a region that should be growing Pinot Noir. It totally got me looking for more Pinot Noir. That was a one-off. Tally didn't want to continue to sell me Pinot Noir, and rightfully so. Tiny, it's just a mess for them to try and bucket out a bunch of things in little volume like that and try and sell it to me. But I really enjoyed making that Pinot. I really liked how it turned out. I thought this is the area for Pinot. This is what I want to continue making. So really from that point on, I was looking for Pinot primarily. Let's see, I ended up with a little bit of Zin a couple of years. I had some Syrah 1 year and some Chardonnay, like I mentioned. But mostly I was sourcing Pinot from where I could find it in the Central Coast.
Got it. So Pinot really became your muse grape to work with and develop. So. And I imagine you kind of developed your own style there in the laboratory that was your garage, and, figured out the way you like to make it and which yeast you're using, and, what type of a crush you're doing to it, obviously in a, 100 and whatever it is, 30, 40 gallon trash can. You've only got, so much room to crush.
Very true. Very true. We did in the basement get up to the ton plus kind of quantity. So we had some barrels down in the basement. We were doing that kind of thing. Yeah, continued to source out Pinot. Got some Pinot from Etnyre Ranch that was really quite beautiful. As we got to bigger volumes and we got to barrels, we had to learn new equipment. So one story that I don't think I've shared ever in public, my friend and I were making the Pinot, and we had to use this piece of equipment called the bulldog pup. Do you know the bulldog pup?
I am not familiar with the bulldog pup.
So the bulldog pup was invented by one of the local winemakers, the winemaker for Quin out in this neck of the woods.
Yeah, I have met him a couple of times. He probably doesn't remember meeting me, knowing his predilection for his product.
You know, he has this wonderful way of making things work in the winery. And one thing he needed was he wanted to develop a way to move wine from barrel X to barrel Y.
Right.
And found siphoning and gravity not to his liking. So he developed a plan to make this contraption, for lack of a better word, that has a very long stainless steel neck on it that goes down to close to the bottom of the barrel, a movable kind of barrel bung type seal, so you can move it up and down that to seal it, and then use compressed gas to push the wine to the next barrel.
Huh, interesting.
Oh, so cool. And you can go barrel to barrel. And this is what a lot of the wineries in the area are using. You can go barrel to barrel really fast. Yeah. It's remarkable how fast you can get things done. But in inexperienced hands, it's a bit of a problem. So we borrowed it from one of the local winemakers who gave us a quick lesson on how to use it. I think we were so excited, we were pretty much paying attention to his description on how we should use it. And sure enough, we were off and running. We had an empty barrel and we had a full barrel, and we started up with the bulldog pup, and it's going and going and going. And it's pushing all the wine into the next barrel, working seamlessly. All the clear wine from the top and none of the leaves from the bottom of the barrel. Just what we wanted. Until we got to the end of the barrel that we were going from. And then all it did is push air really fast. Yeah. So we had our barrel that had all this nice clear Pinot Noir in it, that had this fountain pouring, expelling out of the top. We hit the ceiling with Pinot. It was everywhere. We lost a little bit of Pinot that day. We learned a really important lesson on what not to do. The next couple barrels were much better. We handled them appropriately, but we did have a bit of a barrel problem initially.
I believe that's what noted wine consultant Michel Roland would call macro oxygenation right there.
We definitely were all about macro oxygenation that day. Unfortunately, we had no way of containing that. It just went to the floor. It was a sad day. In retrospect, hysterical. At the moment, oh, not so funny.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you think you've lost your entire barrel of Pinot to the geyser, the old Pinot faithful going off in front of you. Exactly. That's hysterical. So what was it that drove you, I guess, guided you to ultimately become a commercial winery? And was it a case of you decided to plant Quin's Vineyard, your own estate property? Had you done that beforehand, or was it, we're going to be a commercial winery and we're going to plant the vineyard and produce estate wines?
So it kind of just came into place. We initially moved, we rented a place in Pismo. That's where we did the first winemaking that I was describing. And we wanted a place of our own. We looked for 9 months. We looked in subdivisions. We looked everywhere for a house. Our realtor can completely back that statement up. She was tired of us.
And we just happen to have her here. Let's bring on Sherry.
Oh my goodness, that poor woman. We kind of tortured her unintentionally. She was a delight, but we just kept looking place to place. And I knew that if it was possible, we would want to plant something, but we really were looking at such a smattering of different places that was not the clear focus. The focus was to get a place we could live in. And so the house we live in now came available. it's on 5 acres. It's got a big backyard. It's this very small home that we live in, but the backyard is big. And we knew walking into the house that this was the house we wanted to buy, because it offered us all the stuff we wanted. We wanted to live on a little bit of land if we could. The land was plantable. The house was going to work just fine for us. So we moved in here in 95. Did you know Artisan Phillips? Did you ever meet Artisan? His label was McCon Phillips. He unfortunately passed probably 15 years back, but he made some very interesting wines. And I had come to know him through that same wine shop, and we had talked about, what am I going to do with this land? I wasn't sure I really wanted to plant a bunch of grapes, and we talked about running rootstock and doing some interesting things from the standpoint of supply. That really never came about, but we explored doing different things here. Our initial planting was to both Pinot and Syrah, 5x8 spacing, and we planted ballpark 750 vines, so like 3/4 of an acre. We liked what we got so much over the next 3 and 4 years. That planting was in 98, that we decided to plant more. And so we just moved land around and cleared it through and planted additionally twice in 2002 and 2006 to get to our current acreage of 2 acres of planted vines, pretty much production-wise split down the middle. Pinot and Syrah. Syrah is going to overproduce compared to Pinot, so we have less Syrah vines, but they produce pretty equally as far as volume.
Got it. So
how does that work? You have like a little more than half to Pinot Noir, but Syrah is so vigorous, or is it 3/4 and 1/4 and Syrah is that vigorous?
It's kind of 1/3, 2/3 ish. We have one area that's half an acre planted meter by 2 meters. So it's pretty dense planted for Pinot. And so there's 1,000 vines out there at half an acre. And I'm sorry, at an acre, so half an acre planted. I'm not sure I was clear about that. Anyways, there's 1,000 vines. It takes up half an acre of space. That's what I really want to say. And our total planted Syrah is probably 2/3 of an acre, but will produce at 4 tons to the acre with no challenge in quality. Yeah.
Nice. So when you decided to plant, did you have somebody who was guiding you in terms of like specific clones to work with? Were there clones that you knew you wanted because of the style that you were going to make? Or was it basically all built around, your soil, your environment, the way the sun hit, the fact that you're 3 miles away from the ocean and very cool climate in that sense?
It has a lot to do with what we have, as far as being a cool climate vineyard on a slope. That helped us with picking our rootstock, picking our vines. I knew I wanted to grow Pinot, and then I knew I liked Rhone reds. And so what I really wanted was I wanted to plant Marsanne. I wanted to plant Syrah, and I wanted to plant some Grenache, and I wanted to plant some Mourvedre. And so I talked to the person that I was dealing with as far as back to John Alban. Back in the day, John Alban used to do nursery business additionally as to all the vineyard management and winemaking that he did. And I told him that that's what I wanted, because he was going to graft the sticks for me and sell them to me the next year. And that's how I was going to start the vineyard, rather than going to other sources more statewide. And he said, wait, how big is your land? You don't want to do that. He says, you got to have barrel quantities. You don't want to have partial barrel quantities.
Right.
And so really it was on his advice that I ended up planting 2 varietals instead of what would have been probably 5. It would have been a big hot mess of, all these minuscule lots. I mean, I'm minuscule to begin with. And
Right.
they would have been the ultra minuscule little tiny lots, trying to deal with them, trying to not have them get too oxidized. So that's how I came to two different varietals, Pinot and Syrah, not additional varietals, which I would have loved to have had, but I just, there's not the space for it. It didn't make sense.
And so in the end, you make 2 wines. You don't make clonal selection or weird blend or something.
I do not. It's pretty straight ahead stuff. Yes, you get a Pinot selection from me and a Syrah selection from me. That's what I can deliver.
And the name Quin?
Quin is my son. So back to the label.
Yes.
So Etnyre is me, my last name. The kind of background circular symbol that you see is the Japanese symbol for Mikuni, my wife's last name. And then my son is Quin. And way back when I was trying to think of how I was going to make a label, I thought, well, first I had to pick a name for the winery. And back to that Dalinger Pinot, I kept trying to think of the catchy name and what I was going to call it and what was it going to be? What was this really catchy name for my winery? And, you know, in those days, the wines that I liked Dalinger Pinot, Rocchioli Pinot. I like Pinots with unpronounceable last names, and I fit right in. And so
those are back, by the way, except it's not people's last names. It's just weird words they've come up with that are unspellable.
Yeah, exactly. And so came up with, that's what I was going to call my wine. I needed a label. My uncle, who lives in Chicago, who doesn't drink at all, is a graphic artist. And I said, want to make me a wine label? He says, well, I've never done that, but I'll give it a shot. He sent me so much cool graphic art stuff. And this was back in the day before solid internet connection. So I was getting hard paper, thick envelopes, routine, and I'd circle things and I'd cross through things and we'd talk on the phone, and we went back and forth for 6 months probably, and we came up with this label.
It's like working for J. Walter Thompson. Sorry, Chicago reference there. That's the big advertising firm out of Chicago.
I'm so disappointed I missed the Chicago reference.
That's okay.
He's a doctor. He's a doctor.
They did all of McDonald's advertising and some of Coke and whatnot, but
all of them. So my uncle used to do Ronald McDonald charity pamphlets and all of their literature.
Oh, so nice.
Another McDonald's connection.
Yes.
My wines don't go remarkably well with McDonald's, by the way.
I imagine I could definitely pick this out with like a double quarter pounder with cheese. I think that would be fantastic. Or the old Arch Deluxe, one of my favorites. But
so is it, you said it's the Japanese image of your wife's last name, which is
Mikuni.
Mikuni.
Yes.
And then the pinstripes are something that I really haven't seen on any other labels, but I really like it. It kind of sets it apart.
Just a design element that my uncle presented to me that we kind of thought was going to be all right. It's understated. It's the kind of label that I like. My eye is caught by some of these really big and bold labels, but this is what I wanted to put on the label. It's curious because this is the prime spot for advertising, and so many people are so good at advertising on the entire front and back of the bottle. And I guess I missed that class. I have a small label.
Simplicity is key.
Yep.
It's kind of working for us.
Sans serif font. It all works. No, it is elegant. It is understated. It does have, I mean, even before you sort of notice that that's a Japanese character, it does have that kind of Eastern, like, cleanliness, that kind of sense of zen to it, which is really nice. So has this basically been, even through your your home winemaking days? Has this been the label that you've used, or was this what you put into place with the commercial side? And have there been any modifications since then, or has it pretty much just been this design since?
It's all on the commercial side that this label has shown up. Back in home winemaking days, I would put anything on a label. I put pictures of my brother falling asleep on the label. I put anything went on the label back then.
So you're Herman Story then. You're Russell Fromm.
It had that kind of feel. Or just handwritten labels, whatever was working for the moment. But this has been our label the entire time. I don't know that it's going to change. That's not totally correct. The front's not going to change appreciably. The back label, I'm just interested in putting a little more wine geeky business back there. So it'll have harvest date, it'll have pH, it'll have bricks at harvest or sugar at harvest. I enjoy when I can pick up a label that looks like that of somebody else's wine. So I think that's information I'll be starting to provide, possibly on bottling. We're going to bottle our 21 wines in March or April, it looks like. And so it looks like probably starting then is when the label will change a bit on the back.
Got it. Well, yeah, let's jump into the 2018. So how long are you typically aging your wines for? It sounds like it's maybe like a 16, 18-month period.
Yeah, so fermenting and then into barrel and into the barrel room, they stay there until generally early a season and a half. So 16, 18 months is typical barrel age time frame. No new oak. Primarily Francois Frere, once and twice used oak, so we get some oak influence, but not a lot of oak.
Nice.
And your protocol is the same year after year. So what we're able to see really is vintage variation.
Which is, it's an interesting statement you make. That's what I like to talk about. Garagis Festival has that night before where it's the rare and reserved. Last couple of times that I've participated there, I've brought 3 years worth of variety of vintages of Pinot, and then let's see, last one was a 2005 Syrah that we brought. Tasting some stuff that people don't usually get a chance to taste. Tasting wines where exactly that it's really the year that it's what Mother Nature gave us that you're tasting is as the difference. So you can pick out plenty of similarities, but there can be some subtle differences definitely, because the barrel program's much the same year in and year out. The Vineyard program is really quite similar year in and year out. And so, we're looking to express what we can get from our vineyard, from our place. And this is what we get. I love this kind of wine, both from a Pinot standpoint and from a Syrah standpoint of prettier wines, of nuanced and layered wines, wines that certainly are grown in the New World, but have kind of an old world influence. There's some earthiness going on. That's the kind of wine I like to drink. Fortunately, that's the kind of that's the direction that we can get out of our wine. That's my goal.
So I'm curious, how are you sourcing, 1 year used barrels? Obviously, the second year can be the ones that you had first year, but who uses them first? Do you have a kind of a pipeline, a source where you're sourcing them from?
I have a wonderful pipeline that it's never been explicitly stated, but I believe that there's an interest that I don't disclose who that is.
Absolutely. We understand that.
And so it's a wonderful organization that I have a very close association with that allows me to pick up some of their 1 year used barrels. They love to use Francois Frere. We can jump in and acquire a few, and then I can use the ones that I've used as 1 year barrels, as 2 year barrels. We generally don't use neutral oak. It's usually got a bit of oak influence. I have a good situation, I think, from that standpoint.
Good. Hopefully,
Francois Frere really should sell 1 year used barrels, is what they should do. That's a great business opportunity. If they were selling them, they'd be able to market. Anyways, different subject.
Yeah, it would be, you'd have to figure out the logistics behind that of, actually where are you getting the wine to put into the barrels and then what is happening to that wine. But if they had a buyback program where it was like rent a new barrel and then you give it back, that would there's an interesting twist on barrel cooperage there. Interesting. Now so you planted the vineyard in 2000 and I'm sorry, back in, you initially planted it back in 98, is that correct? And then you planted again in 2002 and 2005, you expanded it out.
2006.
2006, sorry, wrong year. But then it still took you to 2013 to become a commercial winery. So what was the Rubicon that you crossed to sort of become commercial? Was it simply a matter of volume, or was it just you had so much wine at that point you're like, we've got to figure out a way to sell this?
Yeah, my liver couldn't take anymore. No.
No, he said he became commercial in 2005.
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to jump back.
I just had to go back to my notes.
You're paying a little bit too much attention to what I say, though. No, no, exactly. We became commercial in 2005. We were making quantities that, well, actually, less about quantity, more about, I love the wine, actually. I mean, I go back and have 2005 Pinot or Syrah. I'm floored by how good it is still. And I say that to say that then if I drink my 2006, I am not so floored. So it's not as though all of my wines are spectacular. You should drink them all at 20 years old. That's not the truth. Well, we had incredible grapes and incredible fruit coming off, and we had wonderful wine that we were producing starting in 2005, which was, we had a little bit of fruit that came off in 2003, 2004 that I was just kind of becoming comfortable with and trying to understand what kind of quality we could get. I just thought, we should have a label that can produce this kind of quality. I think this is a reasonable thing. This makes a lot of sense, I think.
What is your total case production?
We're currently at 200 to 250 cases, but way back when we were small and we were waiting on 2002 plantings to come up, we were waiting on 2006 plantings to come up. Yeah, when we were small. That's a good one.
Right, 250 cases now is.
I saw you caught that.
Dow,
I said that.
J-Lore, we're all.
I saw that. The smirk came. I'm like, oh yeah, I really said that, didn't I? Anyways. Yeah, so we had some years where our production was a barrel of Syrah at most. We had one year when we had a full half barrel of Syrah. That was exciting. Farming costs did not pan out that year. And we've had generally a barrel plus of Pinot. But back in the early days, a couple of barrels was really exciting.
You're large when you can no longer stack all the wine in your house.
That's right. Yeah, it was becoming a little bit of a problem, and we had to move it on out.
And where are you doing your production these days?
At Tally.
Okay, got it.
Tally has offered us space that they don't offer to anybody else, and so I took them up on that offer because it was the most generous thing going.
He won't give you fruit, but he'll give you space.
No.
Exactly.
Are they going to give you space at their new downtown Tally Alpha Omega tasting room that they've got there?
We haven't had that discussion yet. We'll have to see.
Wait. Tally and Alpha Omega are doing a tasting room together?
Yeah, right at the corner of 12. Don't they? I thought Tally owns Alpha Omega, if I'm not mistaken.
No, Devin Nunes is
an
investor in Alpha Omega. No.
Okay. Well, there's somebody down in the Valley who also owns Alpha Omega. I can't remember who they're part of.
Interesting.
I'll have to look back.
Not a good pairing. You've got finesse, and then you've got over your head Napa Blanc.
Well, they're here. They're weird. Get used to it. So talk to us a little bit about the 2018 vintage for your Pinot. Give us a sense of what that year was like. I know a little bit about, how it was here in Paso, but obviously you're, nearly an hour south and much closer to the coast. So what was 18 like as a growth year?
So it was minimally hotter than our average year. It was a pretty typical year for us, actually. The quality of fruit that came in was really quite good. We've really only had difficulty one year with quality of fruit from a Pinot standpoint, where we had a little bit more mold than we wanted to see. Mold is something that, when you're really coastal and you get a little bit of rain, that just gives us trouble from a Pinot standpoint. So we lost about 5% of fruit one year, but otherwise we've had no difficulties there. The 18 was a pretty straight ahead year from the standpoint of weather. We have, where we're located, it's quite commonly overcast through about 10 o'clock in the morning, maybe 11 o'clock, kind of clears out. We get some nice sun that might return at 3 or 4 o'clock, might not. It was pretty straight ahead.
Okay. And so take us through the production of this wine. When were you harvesting? When you got the grapes in, are you doing any, whole cluster fermentation? Or are you just pressing off immediately? Kind of take us through the process.
So, excuse me. Our production typically we'll harvest early morning at sunup, maybe a little bit ahead of that, try and get the fruit in cool to the winery. We process the fruit quite quickly once we bring it in, so it doesn't sit around very long at all. It's primarily, we add 10%-ish stems back. We kind of look at what the stems are looking like, what the quality of the fruit is looking like, how much stem inclusion can we get away with or feel will reasonably contribute to the wine. And so it's destemmed right when it gets to the winery. The fruit is then, we add the stems back at a small volume, and we ferment in 1 to 2 ton fermenters that stay mighty cool. We add a little bit of dry ice to try and keep things cool. We usually get a cold soak of 3 days, sometimes upwards of 5 days. That helps nicely with color extraction, a bit of flavor additional. Let's see, what else can I tell you about? All native yeast. We don't add any yeast. We don't add any malolactic starters. We bring it in. We want to see what the fruit can do, really.
Is the stem inclusion, is it generally 10% every year, or you're saying for 2018 that's what it was?
For 2018, that's what it was. It's generally 10-15%. Early we didn't. So I would say 2005 till about 2011 was when we weren't including any stems, and so we started including stems routinely after that. But really, I'm not interested in increasing that too terribly much right now. I've thought about going a little bit higher, maybe upwards of 20%. I like what we get where we're at, and so I'm not so sure I really want to change that, really.
Nice. And obviously at this point you've had your vineyard for well over a decade. What are you looking for as the wine's fermenting, as it's being produced? Are there certain aspects that your vineyard is capable of that you're trying to pull out? Or are you really just kind of not throwing up your hands and, saying, Mother Nature, take the wheel? But is there a certain style or certain flavor components that you're looking for or trying to urge the wine to get to?
Great question. Early on, especially going way back to home winemaking days, it's all about the numbers. You can assess the numbers and you can make all your decisions based on the numbers. And it's pretty straightforward, and scientists kind of love that. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to make some wine, and I'm going to look at the numbers, and I'm going to make great wine based on the numbers. And while there's nothing wrong with that, I became able to learn about through where we make our wine and how things work out with the winemaker at that facility, to understand the flavors in the grapes themselves, which when you have a vineyard, is a little challenging. You get a couple of points. You get 5 points on that line as far as how the grapes are tasting through until the time you harvest. Whereas a winemaker who's sourcing grapes from several different vineyards, from many different blocks, you're tasting day after day after day, and you have a clear understanding. So I would taste with him the grapes that I was bringing in, and we would talk about where we were at with flavors in the grapes, where we thought we needed to be if we were there. And I learned a lot in working with Eric Johnson from the standpoint of numbers are important, but flavor in the grapes is really important, and looking to get to the flavor profile that you like in a grape, making sure that you're getting ripeness that's appropriate for the grape you're working with before harvesting, before the numbers look perfect. You have to have the right flavors there first. And so yes, I love looking at the numbers. I've more and more over the last 8 years or so really loved learning about making sure I'm tasting the grapes, making sure that the flavors are right there, because then we should get the flavors we want in the glass.
I think to your point, Chris, when you first tasted this wine and you said you got more earthy, I mean, that stemminess is giving it a little bit, it's got a little stemminess on the nose. It's really nice.
Yeah.
It gives it a nice savory quality that makes it really yummy.
Yeah, and Allison had chimed in, sorry, about what stem inclusion can do, but Stacy wanted to know what your thoughts were about what including the stems does to the wine.
It can add a nice backbone to the wine. It can add an earthiness like was discussed. It adds a bit of tannin as well, potentially. There's discussion about it can subtract out a little bit of color. That's not what I'm really concerned about, is the color. I get the color I get. My highest rated wine was a Pinot that looked light as could be. I was considering not submitting it because it was such a light Pinot. I'm not these days so concerned about what the color looks like. I want to make sure I've got the flavor components that I'm looking for.
Yeah,
it is. Go ahead, Allison.
No, go ahead.
No, you first. You start.
Well, I was just gonna say it's a really pretty one. I mean, it's not a deep color. It's not super light, but it's not a deep color. But it's got, that pretty balance between kind of the red fruit and the savory characteristics that make it, I mean, it's part of that cool climate element, but also just the beauty of what Pinot is, that savory fruit balance.
Wonderful statement, Allison. You use the word pretty as many times as I use the word pretty when I'm talking about Pinot, which is what I love. I love pretty Pinots. Fruit bomb Pinots are interesting. To me, it's not so Pinot-like though.
Yeah.
And when I'm pairing foods with wine, I make 2 different wines. I've got a lighter style wine. I've got a heavier style wine. I can figure out if that's going to be appropriate for what I'm making. Pretty Pinots, earthy Pinots. I love that style. Fortunately, that's what I can make. That's what I'm going to continue to make, no question. I think it's such a beautiful grape, such a beautiful wine when you've got something that's pretty and earthy. Wine should have fruit. This wine, I believe, still has plenty of fruit, but it would not be characterized as a fruit bomb, no question.
No.
My mind, anyways.
No, it's elegant. It has this lightness to it, and part of that is that kind of really bright acidity that, in addition to those tannins, I think really provides that backbone. It has this leanness, almost a kind of a stony steeliness to it, which it feels like that's sort of what Pinot is moving away from for a lot of people, and Pinot's starting to get into that, I hate to say, sort of like cabby mouth feel, at least commercially, but it feels like that's kind of the way things are going. And this one is definitely super light on the palate, super bright. It hits you with a lot of flavor, but then fades away very quickly because of that higher acidity to it.
Only if you're drinking like $13 Pinot is it in that cab section.
Well,
or
then it's got a
Mayoli.
whole bunch of like mega purple in it, or petite Syrah, or all
Exactly.
sorts of fun things.
No, but I mean, I think the funny thing is that what we like about the wine is not just the fruit, which is more kind of cherry pomegranate like, but the savory note and normally if you think pretty, you think kind of like delicate fruit and it's light, but the savoriness I think is what makes it such a pretty wine. It balances it, but it also has character and a really nice. I know if you've seen the menu, it has a nice mouthfeel. I like that word, but
It's not bad.
I actually have some professional friends in the wine business who say we shouldn't be using flavor terms to describe wines because those can be very subjective, but we should be using the weight, the mouthfeel, how it feels when it hits your tongue, hits your mouth, to describe a wine, and asking people questions of what they like based on those components, as opposed to, do you like, a wine of strawberries, or a wine of cherries, or a wine of, plums or whatnot.
Well, and as you both mentioned too, one of the things about really that's classic through these wines, but also through all the wines I make, is they are without question higher acid style wines. Higher acid in my mind and in many people's mind will work much better with foods. You can pair it more easily with foods. It's got a refreshing quality. It may not be the wine you select at 3 p.m. to have a glass of wine while watching some TV program with nothing to eat. You may want a big cab or a big Pinot for that matter. High acid wines and food just pair so wonderfully. That's another thing that you'll find is going to be consistent across the board with the wines that we have is a higher acid style.
So I know we're going to talk about the 2017, but I have to say on my initial tasting the two side by side, as much as I like them both, I was leaning towards the 2017 because it had a little more elegance, a little fresher element to it. This had a more savory, but clearly I like the 2018 a lot.
Okay.
It really, I mean, it just opened up so beautifully. I think a lot of that, the dark fruit and intensity when it first was poured kind of softened, and it really beautiful wine.
Yeah, she's like Mikey. She's the reverse Mikey. She almost never finishes a glass of wine. So the fact that she finished it is quite a testimony.
A good sign.
Yeah. I have empty glasses for the Syrah.
There you go. Well, yeah, let's before we jump on to the 17, and maybe this is something you want to save because it would be pairings, similar pairings for both of these. But in terms of, food pairings, what do you like to pair with your Pinot? What do you think would go well with this 18?
So one of the dishes that I love to make that goes wonderful with the Pinot is going to be, I love salmon and Pinot. I think that pairing is tremendous, even though I know some people will say, well, but you need white wine. Salmon and Pinot works wonderfully for me. So we didn't get a chance to talk when you came by and picked up the wines. I'm a terrible, obsessed foodie.
Oh.
And so not only do I like the salmon, but I like salmon with miso, and I like to marinate the miso with the salmon for half a day, which brings me to, and so it's our homemade miso that's aged 3 years in the front hall closet.
Oh, wow.
And so it's got a good bit of funk to it, which helps to pair it with an earthiness that goes on with the Pinot, but the funk is not quite overwhelming from the standpoint of the fish itself. And so I end up with dishes like that, a pappardelle with a mushroom sauce, mushroom and butter, porcinis. I think that's wonderful with some Pinot. I'm a huge mushroom fan. I'm so disappointed by all this rain because the ground is so soggy. I can't go out and look for mushrooms easily enough. I lack boots that go up to my knees. So once we get some slightly drier days, we need to get some chanterelles in the house.
Nice.
Oh,
I should
but
introduce you to my friend Brian, who on his family's vineyard property up here in Paso Robles planted I think they planted like 700 or 800 black oak trees and do truffle hunts up here. So if you're a mushroom head, it sounds like that would be something up your alley.
that would be heaven. Yes, that sounds tremendous.
Nice.
Tremendous.
Yeah, given the higher acidic nature to this wine, I definitely can see this with something a little fattier like a salmon that has that richness, that fattiness. This to me is kind of the quintessential reason why Pinot is paired with duck, because duck has such of that like rich fatty quality, and this is so lean and has that acid which would just cut right through it. I would actually love this with I just had this when I was dropping off with some sushi. I think this would be fantastic with some good toro or maguro or some of the other fish that are there that have that richness, that fattiness to it, to really pair nicely with and it's not going to overwhelm a delicate piece of nigiri with it. I think this would be a great sushi wine.
I think that the 2018 would also work with lamb lollipops.
Yes,
that would be nice.
Just, just not a lot of meat, just a couple bites, and that savoriness with the simplicity of a grilled with olive oil and salt.
And for our resident vegans, the caroccas, the pappardelle with the mushroom sauce, I think would be fantastic with this. A great way to go. Yeah. Or even doing like shiitake, lettuce cups would be really nice with kind of a maybe in a little bit like a sticky kind of a savory sweet, not a teriyaki, but like almost like a duck sauce kind of flavor to it. Right?
I would do that more with the 2017.
Okay. All right. Which we'll talk about now. Yes. Tell us a little bit about the differences between 17 and 18 in terms of growing conditions. I know 17, at least here in Paso Robles, was a very wet year for us. We had a fair amount of rain very early in that year, if I remember correctly, which was great because we were just coming off of a number of drought years in 13, 14, and especially in 15. So it was nice to get a good bout of rain at that point.
Interesting you mentioned the rain. So certainly we had some rain early in the season. We had it around flowering, which is a little problematic from the standpoint of fruit set. So we set slightly less fruit than we usually would up in the vineyard. I think that probably adds to the intensity of this wine. I think that later in the season, it was a bit more typical, not much moisture for us. We do drip irrigate at our vineyard. And so we have a pretty standard regimen that we look for to make sure that the soil has at least enough moisture to support the grapes. Later in the season, cutting way back, really not watering at all. But I think that on a hillside, we can get away with that and still get intensity of fruit flavors. I think it's just really the hillside and the cool vineyard location that produces the prettier wines, less about the amount of water that's utilized. So that season, wet initially, a little bit of decreased fruit set. I think that that's where the intensity comes from. It was slightly warmer towards the end of the year for us on a consistent basis. And so I think also that lends to the intensity that's noted a bit more on the 17 as compared to the 18. I think that's in broad strokes the differences that I would suggest.
I mean, I would say that the sort of lighter fruit aromas probably tie in well with what you're saying, that it was a little cooler, a little less. I mean, it doesn't have quite the depth of fruit aromas that the 2018 did, but there's something really pretty about this wine in a different way than the first wine. It's got a freshness to it. I mean, it's a year older, and yet it still has almost a fresher nose, a little brighter, a little more, I don't know.
Yeah, I think the red fruits on this are a little sweeter, a little fruitier than
Mhm.
that. It doesn't have the leanness that 18 did. And I'm wondering if that's because of the, extra rain and that, less fruit set. You get a little more sugar contact in there just in terms of the overall production. It still has that lightness, that great acidity. I imagine, that's just part and parcel with the vineyard, given your proximity to the coast, the amount of fog, the wind that you get coming in out of there.
Exactly so. And then, one thing that we didn't talk a whole lot about with the 18, but I think is pretty consistent both through Pinots and Syrahs for us, is that the finish is really quite long lasting. Not primarily, but from a pronounced standpoint, from an earthiness, there's also fruit coming through on a longer finish, but I think that the vineyard is really what will help us to accomplish that longer finish. Yeah, a lot of Mother Nature gave us is the difference in the two wines.
Yeah. Absolutely. But it's still what's fantastic about it is, you can easily connect the dots between the two. You can see your winemaking style in this, the lightness, that little bit of stem inclusion that gives it that earthy, that kind of tangy note up front. There's a lot of similarities between the two.
Thanks.
Yeah. Absolutely. What clones do you have planted or using? We usually don't get too deep into the specific clones, but I know with Pinot and especially with Pinot heads, they're very cognizant of the different clones that are used and what aspects they use or how well they do in certain vineyards.
So going back to how we got a hold of our initial sticks and how we planted, that was back in the day when John Alban did nursery business as well. So rather than just making 100-point wines, he was selling sticks. And so he grafted Pinot Noir, the 2A clone from Rosemary's at Tally. And then he also grafted the Alban 1 clone for Syrah. And we planted that on pretty classic rootstock for around here, 5C. And actually, no, sorry, that was the second planting was 5C. The first planting was 10114. And so we started with pretty classic big clones for the area. Subsequent plantings of Syrah were additionally also Alban 1 clone. Subsequent plantings for Pinot, we in that dense planting area that I mentioned, the 1 meter by 2 meter spacing. That is a field blend of 115, 667, and 777.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about the different clones, and are there certain flavor profiles or aspects that each brings? If there aren't, that's fine.
I don't know that there's huge difference, and quite honestly, that's because I'm less familiar with bringing them in and fermenting them separate. Because really, we're so small that we have to harvest it all on the same day. So we pick the day that's going to be best for the fruit and for the vineyard in its entirety. But there's a slight difference between our couple blocks of Pinot. There's usually not much difference between our blocks of Syrah, the 2 blocks of Syrah. Mm-hmm. One year we had a big enough production and it was just easy enough to get it done where we separated out the 2 different blocks of Pinot. Since then, we haven't done it, so I can't really speak with great knowledge. I'd be making stuff up and kind of speculating. Back in 2014 was when we separated them out, fermented them separately. The 2A was a prettier wine, slightly more acid driven. The field blend of 115, 667, and 777 had a bit more going on in the mid palate. It was a fruitier wine. Maybe had a little bit less finish than we find in the 2A clone. Part of the challenge there is that it's not a perfect example of what we do because we bottled that in cork. We were not able to bottle that in the Stelvin enclosure, which we bottled basically everything else in. So there may be some influence there. I'm speculating.
Have you done Stelvin since the start?
Stelvin since the start. Nothing bugs me more than a corked wine.
And
Just drives me a little nuts.
I actually have a story coming out in a couple of weeks about clones with Pinot, having done a clonal tasting with a winery, Bouchain, who does single vineyard. But I think that, as Chris said, it's for the geeks, but I still think it's so much about where the grapes are planted more than it is about the clone. The clone does not override the terroir. The terroir is the influence. And I think what's so special about the SLO Coast is that it's proximity to the ocean and that it has this super long growing season. Because to what you were saying, that the sun comes out later, and it's not that the days are hotter or that the days are longer, it's just that the amount of sunshine, it's just a long growing season. So the grapes really get to ripen without getting overripe or burned or cooked or whatever.
Exactly. So we are always last in the winery as far as bringing in our Pinot, last Pinot. Bringing in our Syrah, we're the last Syrah. This year we brought in Syrah November 1st. It finished fermentation November 30th.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man.
That's amazing, because I know some wineries that were, done by like the first week in September. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. I talked to somebody earlier today. They're like, wait, November? You were doing stuff in November? Like all of November. Yeah.
That's amazing. And just to circle back to what Allison was saying about the clones, I think you're absolutely correct. Although I do think that you can pair certain clones with certain terroir to kind of enhance both of them. That one doesn't necessarily override, but there are certain clones of Pinot that are intended for different soils and whatnot. And I also know some people, a relative of my girlfriend's, who he, grew up wine tasting in the Willamette Valley. So he could legitimately go to a winery and be able to taste something and ask, oh, is this Pomard? Is this 667? Is this 777?
He could, but if he goes to the Russian River or if he goes to the Santa Rita Hills, he cannot. That's my point about clones, is that it's great in a region when you know them. Yes, you're absolutely right. They do, one will be higher acid, one will be more floral, one, absolutely. But when you take it out of the region, it doesn't, I'm not saying that the most acidic clone in Willamette is the deepest, darkest in Santa Rita Hills, but it isn't a guarantee that it's going to reflect the same way. So I've heard many know-it-all Pinot people throw clonal comments out in a winery, but the thing is, it's really regional, and you have to know what it does in a region more than it is like, oh, you use the Dijon clone, you're fancy,
Carrie is smirking, which makes me think he's one of those clone people who, could pick them out there.
I don't think so. Carrie, are we kind of eye to eye on this, or are we disagreeing? Eye to eye, or?
He doesn't know. It's clones are clones.
But there's this lovely mouth-watering. I already poured my Syrah, but as I finished that Pinot, the 2017 has this. Carrie had mentioned minerality, absolutely, and this beautiful mouth-watering finish. It lingers and lingers and just creates. You salivate. So it's lovely.
That's what I'm going for. It's a salivation kind of wine.
Yeah, so we gotta go because I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the Syrahs, and of course we'll start with the 2018 Syrah. And what I find interesting about this one is this is your highest alcohol wine out of the four wines we have here. Everything else seems to be right around 13.5, 13.6, but this one is 14.3 a little hotter. I don't know if that was due to the year or just the way that this grew.
The year and the way it grew, the flavors, once we got the flavors we liked in the vineyard, then we brought it in. I've in the past, so back before 2011, I brought in some fruit that had a lot of sugar on it. We had to water back. And I still think that they made really interesting wines, but I think that the acidity was a little diminished. I think that the wines didn't have as much balance as I would have liked. I'm going to exclude the 2005 from all of those. Those were the most curious wines. All the numbers looked exactly like they should. The fruit tasted wonderful. But, you know, it was the subsequent years where my belief at that time, I was bringing in fruit that was ripe from the standpoint of taste, but my points on the curve were so limited that I wasn't as clear as I could have been, or as clear as I wanted to be, as far as what kind of flavor components were in those grapes. And so they ended up coming in hotter. I ended up I don't think I've had anything, I haven't had anything over 15. I think I've gotten up to 14.5, but I've had years where my Pinot has more alcohol than my Syrah. I've had years where they're exactly the same. Again, going out to the vineyard, tasting the fruit, bringing it in when it seems most appropriate is where we're going to get that alcohol level from. More recently, there's been no water adds. It's really just, what's the fruit looking like out in the vineyard? What do we get?
Yeah. So
There's-
go ahead, Allison.
Oh, no, you spoke before, obviously the vineyard, the vines are in the same place, and you said 18 was a pretty consistent, normal year.
Mm-hmm.
So applying that, to the Syrah, I guess it's just switching grapes in my mind.
Let me see. I have yet to pour the
My my first thing is that it's got a really pretty perfume. There's like some really pretty floral notes.
Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of, like, this is going to sound odd, but like cola flavors, like especially right off the bat. To me, it has that kind of like that, not the sweet cola flavors, but the like true cola nut, like that darker kind of exotic, not quite chocolatey, but that
Or a little more mentholy.
Maybe menthol, maybe even like a sarsaparilla kind of, root beer component to it. But it definitely has a richness and a darker note, which I like. And I really want to talk to you about the idea of cool weather Syrahs, because my belief has always been that Syrah is a grape that needs a body of water to grow really, really well. The northern Rhone, the river where the sun bounces off of it and the grapes get the sunshine. Even down in Barossa, you have a fair amount of water, the ocean, some of the rivers there. But it feels like in California, people think of Syrah as a warm weather grape. It's this GSM, it's this Mediterranean climate. And I wonder if that's what's kind of led to this weird phenomenon that I call amnesia Syrah, where, people will go out wine tasting, they'll taste Syrah in the tasting room, they'll love it, they'll buy bottles. But when they go to restaurants, when they go to wine shops, for some reason, Syrah just instantly leaves their mind. And it's one of the last things that they end up picking up off of the shelf or off of the list. I know this as a retailer, talking to restaurateur friends of mine, Syrah is a near impossible wine to sell on a distribution side. And I just love to get your thoughts on Syrah and, what it's going to take to sort of turn it into a populist grape.
I'd love to see if the winemaker of 100 cases of Syrah has the age-old question that nobody has been able to figure out for decades.
I know exactly what we need.
Please.
We need a movie about Syrah.
We do, yes.
So again, I go back to days past.
San Joseph, the movie.
The movie, right? See, something about Syrah.
No, it's just a case Syrah, a love story.
There you go. We need that hallmark, the hallmark of the Netflix rom-com, que Syrah.
And unfortunately, just like in Sideways, you pick one grape to bash and then you bring the other grape way, way up. Not that I'm suggesting that's a wise marketing scheme or good for grapes, but boy, it sure worked for Pinot. Syrah could use that moment. I completely agree. Syrah is a challenge to sell unless they've tasted the wine, because people don't think about Syrah. Well, and then there's the whole curious thing of where's it planted? What's it going to taste like? Oh, I really like stuff that's totally big and jammy. And then he served me a Syrah that was not. And people aren't clear about what their expectations might be, I find, from a Syrah standpoint. Certainly people more on the periphery of understanding wine and their depth of knowledge of wine. They just like wine. They're not so sure what they're going to get out of a Syrah. And I totally understand why that would be.
I think to your point, a hard thing is that if you know a little bit about wine, you know that Pinot Noir is a cool climate grape. It does not do well in a hot area. You know, Cabernet is a warm climate grape, doesn't do well in cool climates.
Great point.
Then you have the Rhone varieties that are sort of like, you know, Mama Bear,
Magic.
that's like just right, where you can have warm climate Grenache and Syrah or cool climate. And as a consumer, if you don't know that, you know, you might always, or if you always go tasting in Paso and Temecula, warmer climates, your experience is more with warm climate Grenache and Syrah, and you've never been to the SLO Coast or, you know, Santa Maria Valley or
Parts
Willamette.
of Sonoma. Yeah.
Yeah. But man, like I'm a Pinot girl, but if you give me cool climate Grenache, cool climate Syrah, like you have to have cool climate in front of it. And I'm like, absolutely. It's just.
For me, I'm all about that stuff. Cool climate Syrah just makes such a beautiful wine. Again, more of that pretty kind of style, less of the big wine that maybe is sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, not doing much of anything else but your glass of wine. Maybe you want a big Syrah at that time. For me, again, when I'm drinking wine, I'm drinking wine more when I'm having a meal, mostly dinner. And so I can pair a higher acid, less jammy, more kind of pretty, delicate, nuanced flavor wine that has some gout de terroir, some earthiness, something that's going to pair really nicely with the dinner that I'm having. I'm happy as can be. And that's, again, what I'm so fortunate to have here at the place, and that is I can grow the kind of wines that I like to drink. And so I think I kind of scored in stumbling into this place.
Yeah.
I would say that the difference between the two Syrahs is less apparent than the difference between the two Pinots. But
Yes.
what you said about the 2018 and the 2017, both 2017s have a little bit more kind of a restraint, or you can tell that there was a coolness to the year. They don't have quite the riper, richer fruits that the 2018s have offered. And whether that's coming out in more minerality or anything, you know, defined, I think that the 2017 really reflects kind of that cooler year. It's a little more restrained. It's a little more pulled back. Yeah, the vintage really does speak.
Sweet. So I haven't opened the 17 wine yet, so maybe you folks have seen it, but Stelvins are kind of a tough sale, right? Screw cap wines. So my friend, the same friend who owned the wine shop, who we had the men's potluck dinner at, showed me the manner to show the wine. So you present the wine like you would present all wines. You kind of over grab on the collar and break the seal, and then come down through. And because I'm showing this, it didn't quite work the way it usually does, but you come through and then you've got the wine to pour.
Very fancy.
Very elegant. Yes.
Even with the screw cap, I got the fancy.
So my only frustration with the screw cap is that I've now opened 4 wines and I'm all alone. And I want to know, if I put the screw cap back on, how long do you think these wines are going to last? 2 days, 1 day, 3 days, 5 days?
2 days. 2 days easy. 3 days probably is what I would say. I don't keep pretty much any wine on my counter longer than 3 days. I'll keep all of our wines on the counter 3 days. I might not like the experience quite as much the first couple of days, but I don't find problems with the wine necessarily. So I think going into the 3rd day is very reasonable.
Yeah. Carrie's showing off his VacuVin, which is what he uses to keep his Stelvin wines fresh. It is an interesting choice, though. Obviously, you mentioned that you don't like corked wines, which was one reason to move to the Stelvin. Of course, you can still get a little bit of, oxygen flow that can taint the wine, in which case it's not corked, it's screwed. That's right. I'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. 9:30 show is completely different from the 6:30 show. Enjoy the veal. Don't forget to tip your waitress. It's an interesting phenomenon. I feel like I'm starting to see more. I won't even say. Definitely more Pinot Noirs that are utilizing the Stelvin cap, the screw top. But it feels like you're starting to see. It was always a price issue. Wines at $20 or less. More the supermarkets were doing the Stelvin, and if you were going to pay $40-$50 for a cork, you're getting a cork. Basically, for a wine, you're getting a cork. But it does feel like we're starting to get more of the more expensive wines, especially on the boutique sides, done in that Stelvin style.
I'm a big fan. I want to see more and more of that. I have seen Coravon also has a capsule that you can screw over the top of your wine that's got a puncture top to it, so you can use Coravon with screw cap wines. I don't do that, but possible. Vacuvon, I've used that plenty. Between my wife and I, in 3 days works plenty good. And so that's not usually an issue. An issue is just as you described, Allison, where it's more than one bottle of wine, and that can be a problem.
Just pick 2 wines to put the Coravon top on, and then the other 2 I'll have to drink in the next day.
That's not a bad problem.
World's tiniest violin, Allison. World's tiniest violin. I will tell you, I am doing something that I never do for these tastings, which is I'm actually not going to open up your 2017. But here's why. It's for a good reason. I was supposed to this last Tuesday, a local wine bar here in Paso Robles was doing an industry blind tasting of Syrahs. So I was going to bring one of your wines with me to it, but due to flooding and inclement weather and road closures, they pushed it back to this upcoming Tuesday. So I will be taking this with me to the blind tasting. So it will be fun to see what sort of a response we get.
The 2017 blind taste, the 2017, a cooler year, blind tasted against Paso Syrahs.
Well, it
will stand out.
It definitely will, and it won't just be some Paso Syrahs. I know they're going to have some Northern Rhone. I suspect there'll be an Australian or 2. I'm actually thinking about going to the supermarket and grabbing a bottle of Yellowtail just to like mess with everybody.
Because that's just the kind of guy you are.
Exactly, but no, I think it's it's definitely. I think it's going to be very fun to showcase a Syrah from a region that people don't normally think of as a Syrah area. Syrah grown, like how much Syrah is grown like in and around you. Obviously, there's a little bit in the Edna Valley, but in Arroyo Grande, Pismo Beach, I know Spanish Springs doesn't have any Syrah that's being grown there, I don't believe. So
I think Mike Siner's property, Bassy Ranch has some Syrah.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Boy.
But yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I'm the only vineyard within many hundred yards, except there's one vineyard that has had some difficulties across the way. They don't have any Syrah, they're all Pinot. Like you said, Edna Valley has a smattering of Syrah. It's just like you mentioned, Syrah is not necessarily an easy sale. And so planting Syrah, if you're the winery, you're going to have to go through it all in your tasting room or bring it to wine shops and have them taste it and figure out why it's so good. Which is the small hill that I climb. I mean, it's just such a coin toss when I go into establishments to talk about my wines. One place, the Pinot is fantastic. Yeah, your Syrah's nice. And the very next place I walk into with someone who's been in the industry for a long time, the Syrah is amazing. Yeah, I like your Pinot. It's okay. And so, it's really all about taste in the moment, what's going on there, as far as what people feel like. But when you're the consumer, the sale is tough on Syrah. The flavors are wonderful. We need that movie. We could work on that movie.
Well, and I think that I think it's sort of been, hit from two sides, which is that the European examples of Syrah can be very difficult wines for people to navigate because they tend to be, so dark in their flavors. You get a lot of tar, a lot of smoke, that bacon fat. You're not getting a tremendous amount of fruit. There's a lot of bramble, but you're not necessarily getting that kind of fruity blackberry, boysenberry flavors that you are with some of the domestics. And then there was, the other side, which was the flood of, cheap Australian Shiraz, which entered the market. And I think, as people started to realize that Syrah and Shiraz were the same grape, it definitely, in the same way that Merlot was ripe to be taken down, right around when sideways, because there was so much cheap Merlot that was being pumped into the market. Whenever I would go to events, it felt like it wasn't cabs and shards, it was Merlots and shards that were being poured at the little stations for, $10 a glass or whatever it would be at the event center. I do want to talk about one of the most interesting aspects of your Syrah, which is the row of Torrontes that you have. And how did you come upon Torrontes? How did you plant Torrontes? It's such a rare grape. Even now, Silva Spoons has had it for well over a decade, probably closer to 2 decades at this point, and yet it's still a grape that is not widely seen in California. So how did you come about that? Why did you decide to plant it, to blend it into your Syrah?
So going way back again, let's go back to the discussion of how I bought fruit from Tally.
Okay.
I bought Pinot Noir from Tally. So the year was 93. I got to know the winemaker for Tally, really nice guy, Steve Rasmussen. Wonderful winemaker, very skilled, so skilled that he was going down to Argentina to consult fairly routinely. And in Argentina, one of the big white wine grape varieties is Torrontes.
Yes.
And so he brought back some sticks in his suitcase, and he was living at the time out in the Etna Valley. Actually, the farmhouse that is across the way from Center of Effort, just a stone's throw from Kinsey.
Okay.
So he was living there, and he took some sticks and planted them right out in front of the house, and they took off. They were all over the front of the house, and the grapes were very Viognier-like, very
super
floral,
aromatic.
tropical.
Yeah.
Oh, so aromatic, and I had easy access to Torrontes. I didn't have easy access to Viognier. And
Interesting.
actually he grafted them up for me. He rooted the plants and gave them to me. How can you pass on that? So
How much do you have planted?
one entire small row. So I think I have 15 vines. It ends up being approximately 1 to 2% of the weight of the Syrah. There's not much at all going in, but and I haven't had a year when I don't use it, so I can't tell you, oh, there's a clear difference year to year.
Right.
But really nice floral wines. It is my take on the Côte Rôtie, putting a little bit of Viognier in and co-fermenting it. So we co-ferment the Torrontes with the Syrah. It is a challenge to get that all harvested into the same bins, because people who harvest grapes don't like to put white grapes into the red bin for very good reason. But we love how it turns out. I'd love to tell you that a great part of the reason why I love my Syrah is all about that one little row of Torrontes. I'm probably hugely overselling that point, but it's kind of fun. It's a pretty cool thing. When I go up and taste the grapes, the Torrontes taste wonderful. We should be drinking more Torrontes here in the United States.
Have you ever thought about co-fermenting?
Oh, we
That's
do.
what he's doing.
We co-ferment.
Oh, you do
yeah,
co-ferment.
we co-ferment. I think I said that right as you stepped up and stepped away.
Right.
So the wine is co-fermented, harvested same day, co-fermented, treated obviously in this exact same way that the Syrah is treated. And
I mean, Torrontes is a super aromatic grape, so it's not a surprise that even 1 or 2% can add just a touch of influence into the Syrah. And Syrah seems to be pretty malleable to aromatic white grapes.
why not punch up the aromatics a little bit in the nose and see what I can get? So, again, a wonderful friend offering Torrontes for free. I had an extra row where I wanted to plant something. I was going to plant more Syrah there, but he came around and said, you ought to plant this, and gave me rooted Torrontes. So it's own rooted Torrontes. There's no grape stock or rootstock involved in that. And just something fun to throw in.
Do you find you have trouble, getting it in ripeness sync with the Syrah, or does the Torrontes ripen early enough that it matches the Syrah?
It's pretty late, actually.
Okay.
It ends up ripening up on the later side. I must be transparent about this. I have not taken bunches of Torrontes and checked the sugar of the Torrontes compared to the Syrah. I take a vineyard sample, which means I go along and sample the Syrah, and then I go through and sample the Torrontes. It all goes into one vessel. I test that. So the precision of answering your question, I don't have.
Right.
I like how the flavors are when I'm harvesting them, and I'm satisfied with where we're at with that.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's the key. Is if you're tasting them and they taste ready to go, or match up well, then it doesn't matter what the numbers say if you're ready to go with it.
And it's really cool going back to sample those grapes around harvest time, because 2 and 3 weeks before we're going to harvest Syrah, it's not that impressive. It's a white grape that doesn't have a lot going on. But as we're getting closer to harvest time, the aromatics just keep ramping up. It's really cool. We should definitely be drinking more Torrontes.
Yeah, I think it's one of those grapes that it's going to take,
A movie.
It's going to take a movie, or I look at something like Albarino, which to me has been the miracle grape in California over the last 20 years, where it went from most people had never heard of Albarino. They had no idea what it was. And now I feel like, especially on the Central Coast, there are lots of plots of Albarino everywhere. And it feels like every third winery is producing an Albarino these days. It's become a very staple white grape. And we didn't need a movie. We didn't get a book. There wasn't a graphic novel or a video game that, helped push it. It was just a grape that worked in the area.
It was winemakers, the same thing with Vermentino. It's winemakers who understand that those big reds are not going to make it through climate change, and that what you need is those aromatic whites. Yeah. So maybe Torrontes has a little hope after all.
It's coming.
I will talk to my girl Ariana Spoto of Ariana Wines, who spent a lot of time in Argentina and makes Malbec and Torrontes as her two primary varietals. So I will see what we can do to get her to promote the grapes.
Oh, that's cool. I was contacted by somebody in the Central Valley who found out that I had some Torrontes, and he wanted to know where I got the Torrontes from. Where else can he source some Torrontes? And it turns out that all the places he named are places my friend worked at. So he was planting Torrontes in a few places.
Yeah.
So on the Central Coast, he would be the main repository of Torrontes grape vines.
Well, and that's kind of what it needs. I mean, there was one vineyard one nursery company that was responsible for spreading Graciano across California far and wide due to a clerical error. But now we've got Graciano, and you're seeing it more and more everywhere you go.
But Torrontes was not a mistake that everyone thought was Viognier or something.
No, but it could be, is what I'm saying.
It's coming.
Yeah, I think as people get, what's been interesting about the wine business, and Ethan, you can speak to this knowing the business and knowing people in it, is it does feel like smaller vineyards are moving away from we've got to plant Cab, we've got to plant Grenache, we have to plant the grapes that will sell and work in this, and are starting to branch out into it's okay if we plant some Cinsault or some Counoise or some Torrontes or some Vermentino, that are things, because there's going to be a market for them. There are more winemakers coming up who are interested and willing to work with these smaller grapes, smaller varietals.
Well, I think too, if you're starting with a small vineyard, you can get away with some things. If I had another 5 acres, I'd be planting half and half to Roussanne and Marsanne. Well, actually, and Torrontes.
Of course, yes, as discussed.
But you know, I find them remarkably interesting white wines that I can't find enough great examples to drink.
I love this coming from the guy who started out the whole chat with, I wasn't a fan of white wine.
Right.
Yeah,
I was
did mention
cabin.
that,
I was
didn't
cabin Chardonnay.
But I did mention that my number 1 white wine was 100% Roussanne from
Yes.
Chateau Castel.
Yes.
So I have a love for it. It's just perhaps not as grand as my love for red wine.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Absolutely. So as we are a little bit over our 8 o'clock time, we can start to wrap up here. And if people are interested in tasting your wines, you know, obviously they've had kind of the current selection now. How far back do you have? I mean, you mentioned that you do still have a couple of bottles of your original Cabernet, but how far back do you pretty much have verticals of your entire library still available, or at least, you know, maybe not for sale, but accessible to you?
And this, I don't think is the current release, right? Because you said you're about to bottle 2021.
So that's part of what I can get away with, in that the economies of what I'm dealing with and how things work for me. I really like my wines to sit around for a little bit. When we bottle them and 6 months later, I like my wines. I like them better at a year, and in a year and a half, 2 years. Our current release is the 2018. As far as verticals, I think on my website, I've got 11, 12, and 13 Pinot Noir available as a vertical. There are some, certainly I have some reserved wines that go way back, and I've got verticals of everything, except 1 year with that half barrel of Syrah that went away, and I can't find any more bottles. But otherwise, yeah, I've got wines that go way back to 2005. And as far as wines available for sale, there's that vertical on my website. There, I might be able to put something together of a few residual cases, but that's about where we're at. It's pretty much current vintage. I think the website also says 2017 wines are still available. There's 10 cases maybe available, something like
and
that.
When is 2019 being released?
That's probably a fall thing for us at this point. I'm looking at October, November to likely release the 19 wines.
Got it. And Stacy wants to know, how are you able to keep your Pinots lasting so long when others can't/don't?
I have to say that it is a delightful combination of the vineyard that I happen to plant and Stelvin enclosures. I think, we get remarkably age-worthy wines that are not massive. They're pretty. They stay pretty. They, again, I go to that 2005, the initial vintage for us. Pretty wines. When people were tasting the 2005 Syrah that I brought to Garagiste, there was not a soul that would have said that it was anywhere close to that decade. It tasted fresh. It tasted like it was from 2016, 2018. It was impressive to me anyways. Hopefully it was impressive to others, but I got a total kick out of it.
This is what you get by having a cool climate vineyard.
I think it helps. I think the location and what we have vineyard, probably our clones are helping us somewhat, but I think we would have age-worthy wines based on what we're looking to do in the vineyard and what we look to do in the winery. We produce wines that are pretty, that are balanced, that are the kind of wines that I like. They've got some earthiness to them. I think earthy wines, high acid wines age better. Stelvin doesn't hurt me anywhere there. I think we benefit a lot from all of that.
No, now that the SLO Coast AVA is in place, do you find there's a little more competition or trash talking with the Arroyo Grande and Etna Valley folks, since they're just across the road and across the hill?
No, Etna Valley and Arroyo Grande fall under the SLO Coast.
Oh, do they? Okay.
They do. This just
Is it the
encompasses,
whole?
it's all part of it. It encompasses the whole thing. So what it helps is the outliers that never fell into one of those.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, I wrote a story about this last year, and talking to winemakers, you know, I don't know how much more known Arroyo Grande and Etna Valley is than anything else. So they were all excited about SLO Coast as being a big chunk of area people
Right.
can identify.
And while everybody is bigger than I am from a production standpoint, everybody's really friendly here. You know, winemakers are interested in what other people are doing. They're not putting others down. They're not trash talking them. It's really, what's your product look like this year? What'd you get? How's it tasting? I find it really refreshing. It's a great, easy environment to be in.
Well, and you're one of the, I mean, you're small, but you are definitely one of the old hands on the Central Coast these days. I mean, you've got
It's
25 years of winemaking experience at this point. So
yeah, that's an odd thing to think about, that I've been doing it for that kind of time frame. It's been a lot of fun. Learned a lot. Met a lot of wonderful people in the industry, and consumers as well, people who love getting a hold of interesting new wines. It's a treat.
So,
yeah.
Dr. Etnyre, I'm curious.
Ethan.
No, I know, but I'm asking this in a certain way. Is there a point where retirement comes up and you grow the winery as your second career, or is this the happy place where, you know, 250 cases is just the right place? And
250 cases is just the right place. So if I retire, when I retire, that sounds really nice. When there's retirement, then I will have more focus on my evening job. It'll become the day job. But at 250 cases, it's going to be a fun time.
Have you thought about potentially expanding into, you know, one or two other wines, maybe making a rosé, or, you know, finding a source of Torrontes,
or vinifying white, a Pinot, a white
Right.
Pinot?
I'm very interested in Torrontes, Marsanne, and Roussanne. I don't have a source that I'm itching to work with right now. Plus, right now, I think we're good where we're at from a production standpoint, but perhaps over the next few years, that would be something I would consider.
Nice. So if any of our members who are here live or watching this on the replay want to get in touch with you, buy more bottles, do a tasting of these wines, upcoming wines, maybe some of the older wines, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
The website has a way to contact me through the website. Wines are available through the website, etnyrewines.com. That's pretty self-explanatory, I guess.
Etnyre with a Y.
Etnyre with a Y, definitely so. They're available at a few places around the local area, some of the restaurants and wine shops. But really, probably the easiest place to get a hold of me is through the website.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. If you don't mind sticking around for a couple of minutes, if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask Ethan any questions or have any comments, we'd certainly love to hear from you. Gary seems to be one.
I have a question, but I'm waiting till the recording stops.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
okay. Well, I will stop the recording then, Allison, just for you. Bye, everybody.